Hi, everyone. Thanks for stopping by the Time We Discuss studio for another engaging conversation with yet another exciting professional. This channel is really young, so I'd appreciate you hitting all those usual buttons, the like, subscribe, bell, all that good stuff. Doing this helps the channel grow and helps me get even more obscure professionals. Still trying to get that negotiator. All that being said, stick around because I have Christina here and it's time we discuss speech pathology. All right, so today I have Christina with me. Christina, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to have you here. Christina is a speech pathologist. Now, my understanding of what speech pathology is and what it really is, there might be a huge difference there. So my experience, my friend's niece went back to get her master's in speech pathology. So I know she's doing something in that capacity. Didn't really talk to her too much about her job. My son also went to, speech therapy. I'm going to call it, I don't even know if I'm using the right words, to get him to say his R sounds correctly. And then thirdly, when I was a kid, I went to speech. And when I was at speech, I also learned to say the letter R correctly. And to this day, the combination of R and L, I'm still super self-conscious when I use those two letters together. So that's my understanding of what speech pathology could be. But Christina, can you tell us, for real, as my kids would say, or as they used to say, for real life, what is speech pathology and what do you do exactly?
So it's a lot more than just your sounds, which a lot of people think it is just like, oh, speech, they work on getting to kids to talk or, working on their speech sounds, which R and L are very common ones to be worked on. So I'm not surprised you said R. But I mean, speech really can be worked on. We see kids from birth until I've worked with stroke patients. So, you can work on their language, expressive language, receptive language, comprehension, pragmatic language, so social language, articulation. We work on feeding, and feeding can be anything from like breastfeeding, bottle feeding, to chewing your food, oral motor skills. So we kind of really encompass a lot. What else is there? I mean, it's really just like a full circle of everything, basically. So yeah, I mean, we work on everything. We work with, typically developing children, adults, adolescents, children with special needs, varying disorders. And it's really rewarding to see, how they progress, how it affects them, especially, I mean, it affects everybody kind of in different ways. If somebody can't say words and then they start talking, like, obviously that's amazing. If there's also a child who has a hard time socializing and then they finally start understanding the rules of conversation and social language, then that's great because then that's helpful in all social settings and helpful in school. Comprehension. I feel like I'm missing something, but I mean, really, it just encompasses everything related to language, comprehension, feeding, all areas.
So that's interesting. So yeah, I kind of hit a small part of what you actually do. Wow. And interestingly enough, I assumed you just worked with like elementary age children. I assumed like that in the school setting, but that's fascinating that you actually work with, like you said, newborns, and then it could theoretically can be all the way up to adults that have suffered from a stroke, for instance.
Yeah. Yep.
So does your how do I want to phrase this? What you do, does that ever overlap with like an occupational therapist? Like I'm thinking about, like you said, with like the feeding and stuff like that. Do you ever work hand in hand with an occupational therapist as well? Or how would that work?
So yeah, so when I used to work in office, I used to work at an outpatient center that has physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech. And we would do things called like co-treats. And if a child would benefit, for feeding is a great example. So, sometimes, well, feeding was a little bit different. Well, no, it's kind of hard to anyway. So feeding, sometimes the OT would need to work on more so of like textures, getting them to try different foods, more of that area, whereas we would be more of like the oral motor skills. So sometimes a child would need both. A lot of times I feel like in at least the setting where I was in, they would kind of usually need one and then the other. Like if a child was very picky at eating, they would see the OTs first, and then they would come to us. Once they got eating more, then they would come to us and we would practice the actual skill of what they needed to eat the food. But in not related to feeding, we would work, do co-treats with an OT and a speech therapist. So if the child needed, sensory input and had different sensory needs that the OT could provide them during the session, that could make the session go a lot more smoothly because, we would end up learning some tricks and everything, but we're not an occupational therapist. So they're really the ones who can do it. So it was really great when we could have both of us in there because they could do their thing, which then helped us kind of get all of our stuff done as well. And then even physical therapy, we would work with together. But I feel like more so the OTs and the speech therapists would, collaborate and work in that sense.
Okay. You're saying so many things that I'm getting so many questions in my head at once, trying to decide which ones to go with next. So first, let me go with this one. What is a typical, I don't know if I want to say treatment plan, but like how often do you typically see a person? Is it like a weekly, a couple times a week? Does that depend on the severity of what their needs are? What does that typically look like?
So it definitely depends on the severity. It also depends on insurance, and it depends on, I guess not rules, but like, what that outpatient center does. And I think that it mostly ties with insurance, but sometimes the outpatient center or other setting that you could do, they do hour-long sessions or they do half-hour. Like we used to do hour-long sessions and we've switched to half-hour sessions. That I'm not 100% sure why, if it was insurance-based or if it was more so like we felt like we could, the hour was too long and we could just be more, efficient in the half hour. But I've worked with children who have, severe apraxia, which is a type of speech sound disorder. And they have a very hard time with like their articulation and speech sounds. So with apraxia, you need intensive therapy. So they would come in 3 times a week. And that was, their frequency. Whereas most, a lot of other, diagnoses just would need the twice a week, or sometimes they would come in once a week. It really just kind of depended on the severity, what their needs was. I mean, if they were working on one goal and it wasn't severe and, it wasn't, it was just like a mild or moderate type of, disability, but like difficulty, they could come in once a week. Some kids can only do once a week. So they do what they can. But I would say for the most part, kids are usually twice a week. Now in the school setting, that's a whole nother ball game. I worked in the school setting during grad school and it was very quick. Sometimes they were 15-minute sessions. Sometimes they were grouped with other children, but that's just because, there's so many kids in the school and there's usually 1 or 2 speech therapists. So to be able to fit everybody in, they would be quick sessions, sometimes group sessions. So you'll see more in like the outpatient or like early intervention are usually an hour long, and that's with younger children. So it kind of varies, but I would say most of it's based on, severity and, type of difficulty.
Okay. In your experience, now this is just you specifically, so this could obviously vary from person to person. What age bracket do you typically see the most? Are most of your patients like that elementary age, or what does that typically look like?
So when I was at the outpatient center, I feel like we treated birth to 21 at the outpatient center. I feel like primarily my ages were probably between 3 and like 6 or 7. So we saw a lot of like early language, kids who are having, later at talking, and then into like early elementary age, but then, definitely older. I mean, most of my kids that I see now are elementary school and older elementary school.
Okay. And then when you said you're, was it co-treat? Is that what you called it? I think when you work with the OT?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you're doing that, this made me think of this. And I'm thinking of like behavioral therapists, where a lot of times that they will they'll work with the parents for like to make sure they're reinforcing the right things and whatnot. Do you have to work with, specifically when you're dealing with kids, do you have to work with the parents as well, so the parents also kind of reinforcing what you're teaching? What does that look like?
So sometimes we do. So with something like early intervention, I also worked in early intervention. You're going to their house and it's like parent coaching. So you're guiding the parents on the strategies, how to use it, how to implement it. And sometimes, you'll sit back and watch how they do it because, they're the ones with the kids for the majority of their day. In the outpatient setting, sometimes parents would come back, sometimes they wouldn't come back. Sometimes we would recommend that they come back just so that they could, learn what to do. And sometimes they wouldn't want to come back or they would want to come back. So it kind of just varies, but we would always give homework and demonstrate how to do the homework and things like that. So that one kind of varies, but it is helpful when they're there most of the time.
Okay. I can see it. I can see that.
Yeah.
I'm going to put you on the spot with this one. And you might not be able to think of something off the top of your head, but can you remember a moment where you were working with a particular person and they had, I'm going to call it like that breakthrough for lack of better words, that just like made you just like melt inside in a good way? Can you recall anything like that?
Oh, I mean, for sure. I mean, it's happened probably a bunch of times. Now, a specific instance, I don't even know if I can think of an exact instance. Well, actually, one of them recently, I feel like, was I was doing a telehealth session, and we had been working on R for a long, long time with this little girl, and it was a little tricky through telehealth. And she finally like figured it out, and she just like her face just lit up, and it was just like relieving and so exciting for all of us. And then another time I was when I was working in the school. During grad school, and I was walking, and we had been working on, I think it was this K sound for months with this kid. And, I tried every trick, everything. And we just were walking, and he just like said like cat or something like that. And I was like, did you just say the K sound? And like, it wasn't something that I like specifically did for him, but it was like, he just, it just worked and he clicked, and it was just like so exciting. And it's so exciting for everybody when they start, using their language or doing, something. So it's really awesome.
That's awesome. I love it. I love stories like that. Um, so you talked about telehealth. You talked about being in the office. Um, what is there a trend to going more to telehealth with this, or are they're both kind of, they're just both there for the person's preference, or what does that look like?
So I do think that telehealth is becoming more of a thing. Like I've gotten, emails about like, oh, remote job, like remote positions and stuff. But I think in person is going to be always, the more desired and more available position, just because, a lot of parents, so when I was in person, so it's the same company that I work for, but when COVID hit, we went telehealth, and I've just stayed remote because of my kids. So I think I'm like the only one who is solely remote out of my whole company, who we've got offices literally all over. From my knowledge, I think I'm the only one. But so the majority, I think, are in person. But like I said, I do feel like I've been seeing some more, jobs of like, oh, telehealth. I did have a part-time job that was telehealth. So, some people do want it. But I do think a lot of parents want to also bring it. It's kind of tricky because like I know like the kids that I see, like their parents love telehealth because they have other kids, they're busy, they have activities. So just to be able to hop on the computer for a half hour versus driving there, being there, driving home, it's a lot easier. So, I think that it is, desirable for some families, but then for a lot of them, they do benefit more about, to be in the office.
I can see that. That makes sense. Okay.
Mhm.
So let's jump to education. So if someone is starting out and they decide this is the career for them, they like this. What is the traditional path to go down this road?
So, I like when I went to, you have to go to undergrad. In your undergrad, I got my bachelor's in communication sciences and disorders. That might be called something at other colleges. I think it's usually communication sciences and disorders. In most colleges, from my knowledge. If you don't have that bachelor's, I think, anything in maybe education, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So
That's fine.
after that, you have to get your master's in speech pathology. So that's what I'm not sure of. Like, if you didn't do speech, I know some people like haven't done speech in their undergrad, but then have gone and gotten their master's in speech. So I don't know, if they needed to do certain classes undergrad in order to get to there, or maybe have an education background, or who knows. I'm not 100% sure on that, but yeah, you always have to get your master's. If you don't get your master's, you can be like a speech therapy assistant, but I don't think that they can do much in
Okay.
terms of, the treatment and things like that. Or they can. When I was years ago, they couldn't do that much. So maybe things have changed, but it is a very intense and competitive program. Most of this, like I went to Towson, we had 40 people in our class, and that was really big. So a lot of the schools have like 25 people in their class. So it's very competitive and tricky to get into. But it's, it makes sense because you're working with, children and adults and people working, through this. So, but yeah.
Now, aside from having the master's degree, are you also required to have any kind of like state level certifications or anything like that? Does that go along with it?
Yeah, so we are ASHA certified, which is the American Speech and Hearing Association. So you renew your dues every year. You have to do continuing education. I think it's either every 2 or 3 years you have to have, like, I should know this because it just was up. I think it's like 20 or 30, it might be 30 hours of continuing education. And then you have your ASHA, and then what is the other one? I forget. There's something else. I feel like there might be 2 things. But yes, the continuing education and, your ASHA certification is big. And then you'll have a state license. That's what I was thinking of. You'll have a state license. So you can only practice in the state you have a license in. So that's where telehealth also kind of comes into play. Like, I couldn't just treat a child who lives in Jersey because I'm not licensed in Jersey. So some companies might pay for you to like get your license in another state to see a child or see children in that state. But yeah, you can't treat kids if you're not in their state.
That was going to be the next question I was going to ask you. It's awesome they went down the road. I didn't have to think about that one. That was great. So at this point, I like to throw kind of like a surprise question at the person I'm talking to that has nothing to do with their job. So the question I'm going to ask you, Christina, what is a pet peeve that just something that people do that just really just grinds your gears? So I'll tell you what mine is. And
Okay.
I hate when people say, as an example, I forgot my lunch at school, or I forgot my keys at home. It's like, you can't forget something at home. You can leave it at home, or you can forget it. You can't do both.
Yeah, yeah.
So and I'm going to apologize if that's a phrase that you use or any of the other listeners use.
I've honestly never even thought about it. I don't know. I'd probably say I left it at home. Yeah, I don't know.
Christina, a little part of me dies every time someone says that. Like, externally, I'm like, I'm calm, cool, and collected, but internally, I'm like,
oh my gosh, that's so funny. I've never even thought of it. Now I'm probably going to be thinking of it though. Anytime I hear it,
you're gonna be listening to people
like,
now.
oh, they forgot. Yeah, I probably will. I mean, I feel like I have like a few pet peeves, but the first one that came to mind is when people don't hold the door for you, like or when people don't hold the door. No, not that. I'm changing it. When they don't say thank you if you are standing there holding the door for like a solid even like minute or 2, like you're clearly holding the door from them and they don't say anything and they just walk in, and I'm like, you could have just said thank you. So that's like a big one. I feel like, not so much like them holding it for me, but like if I'm visibly like standing here like waiting, like you could just say thank you.
It's not hard. It's 2 words. It's not hard.
Yeah. So I feel like that's the first one I can think of. I'm sure, I'm sure there's others.
Oh, I love it. I love it. The last thing I want to say, usually when I have people come on the show to talk to me, I like to ask them if there's something specific they would like to talk about, a personal project they're working on, a cause that they feel very strongly about, their company. Is there anything that you'd like to share with the viewers? Anything that, like a pet project, cause, anything like that?
I don't have any like I should probably have like a little cause that I'm working towards, but I got 2 kids in there. My like busyness right now. But I mean, I think really just, I guess what I will say is, which is something that has come up, amongst friends and family, is like, if you ever have any concerns about your child or anything of the sort, or if you don't have concerns, but somebody else does, somebody I know's daycare teacher said something about her child yesterday. If somebody has concerns, first of all, don't feel ashamed. Don't feel like it's your fault as a parent. Don't feel like something's wrong with your child. Just seek help. So many kids get therapy, whether it's speech therapy, OT, PT, behavioral therapy. So many kids get those services, and that's, and it's fine. The best thing you can do is get your kid help and do what's best for them. And by helping them in that way, it's not anything to be embarrassed by. It's you helping your kid. So that is what I will end on.
Christina, that is awesome. That is so well said. And it just kind of made me think of some other things that are going on in my life. And it's like, you want to give your child the tools they need to succeed. And that's just awesome. So I'm so glad that you plugged that. I'm so glad that you joined us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And we'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks for stopping by the studio. My name is Dan, and this is Time We Discuss. I really enjoyed speaking with Christina, and I hope you enjoyed the time too. Makes sense in retrospect, but I had no idea that speech pathologists worked with the entire age spectrum. Who knew? Not this guy. At any rate, if you enjoyed the content or learned something interesting, do me a solid. Comment, like, share, subscribe, all those good things. Add a comment if you have a profession that you'd like me to cover, or hit me up on social media. If you'd like to join me in the studio, please visit the sign-up link in the description or visit timewediscuss.com and we'll get you on the schedule. Ask your friends or coworkers to do the same. When you sign up to be part of the show, use promo code SPEECH. This way, I know you came after watching or listening to this segment. That'll do it. See you next time on Time We Discuss.